Imagine living more than 15,000 years ago. There's no farms, no cities, there's no malls, and every single meal requires effort. Every single winter is highly dangerous. And outside the cozy light of the fireplace, the predators, they're always watching. So why would any human invite one of those animals into his camp? And why, thousands of years before people began building cities, were some humans already treating dogs with a level of care that looks surprisingly familiar today? Well, that's because the earliest dogs were not simply tools. Some of them appear to have become something much more unusual. They became family. Dogs are unusual because they joined human life remarkably early. They were living alongside hunter gatherers before agriculture was a thing, before permanent villages existed, and long before humans domesticated most of the animals we now associate with civilization. We still do not know the exact place or moment when wolves became dogs. The process may have started gradually, as some wolves became more and more comfortable scavenging near human camps. Other possibilities involve humans actively raising wolf pups or favoring animals that were easier to tolerate. The details remain debated, but one thing is increasingly clear. By the final part of the Ice Age, the dogs were already deeply integrated into human life. A major study published in Nature in 2026 identified dog remains in Purbunash in present-day Turkey dating to around 15,800 years ago, and from Gog's Cave in the UK dating to around 14,300 years ago. The study found that genetically similar dogs had spread across a large part of Western Eurasia while humans were still living as hunter-gatherers. This is clear evidence that dogs weren't a local experiment that stayed in one isolated camp. They were moving across the entire continent. The most important detail is not simply that dogs existed, it's that similar dogs appeared among human populations that were culturally and genetically distinct from one another. The 2026 study examined dogs associated with several Ice Age groups across Europe and Anatolia. The researchers concluded that dogs were probably exchanged through human migration, interaction, or trade networks. In some cases, dogs appear to have spread between groups without the same degree of human genetic mixing. In other words, two groups of people did not necessarily need to merge with each other to exchange dogs. A dog could move between communities as something valuable in its own right. And that raises a fascinating question. What made dogs important enough to share? The simplest explanation is that dogs were useful. A dog can hear and smell things humans miss. It can notice an approaching animal before a sleeping camp does. It can follow a scent trail, help you find prey, and it can make noise when something dangerous comes close. A dog might also help keep scavengers away from food scraps or make a human camp feel safer at night. We should be careful here. Archaeologists cannot ask an Ice Age hunter what a dog did on an ordinary Tuesday. The exact roles of the earliest dogs remain quite difficult to prove, but it is easy to see how even a partially domesticated canine could provide real advantages. You see, dogs occupy an unusual position. They are descended from predators, but they can cooperate with humans. They can notice danger like a wild animal, while gradually learning to live inside a human social world. That alone could have made them extremely valuable, but usefulness does not explain everything. To understand why, we need to travel to Germany. In 1914, workers discovered an ancient burial containing the remains of two humans. Buried with them were the remains of a young dog. The burial dates to roughly 14,000 years ago. That alone is remarkable. This dog was not simply abandoned outside the settlement or discarded with food waste. It was placed with humans in a burial context. But many decades after this discovery, researchers looked more closely at the puppy's teeth, and the teeth revealed a much more emotional story. The puppy appears to have been seriously ill. The researchers examining its remains identified dental abnormalities consistent with a severe illness, probably canine distemper. Their analysis suggests that the dog experienced serious episodes of disease while it was only a few months old. The puppy was determined to be about 6 months old when it was buried. The researchers argued that survival would probably have required intensive care over several weeks. A sick puppy cannot track prey, it cannot guard a camp effectively, it cannot help hunters. It may need water, food, warmth, and cleaning. Caring for it requires time and energy. And for a hunter gatherer group, those resources matter. The researchers suggested that the care provided to this animal may have been driven by compassion or empathy rather than an expectation of practical benefits. They described it as possible early evidence of an emotionally motivated friendship between humans and dogs. The first dogs may have been useful, but at least some humans were already caring for dogs even when the dogs could offer very little in return. A spear is useful, a basket is useful, a stone blade is useful, but humans do not normally spend weeks nursing a broken spear back to health. This young dog occupied a different category. It was an animal with a place inside the social group. This does not mean that every ancient dog was treated gently. Human relationships with dogs have always been complicated. Dogs served as workers, companions, status symbols, food sources, ritual animals, and much more across the different cultures of those times. But this puppy provides a glimpse of something recognizably modern. A person caring for a sick dog simply because the animal mattered to them. The newer genomic evidence adds an even wider perspective. In Turkey, juvenile and newborn dogs were buried in the same area as human burials. At Gog's Cave in the UK, dog and human remains received similar forms of treatment after death. Researchers also examined dietary evidence. In Turkey, the available evidence suggests that the humans may have been directly or indirectly providing food for dogs, including resources connected to the human occupation of the site. Now, these details are not identical. They come from different places and different archaeological contexts, but together they suggest that dogs were not simply wild animals hovering at the edge of a camp. Humans were feeding them, moving them between communities, treating their remains in meaningful ways, and, in at least one striking case, keeping a sick puppy alive. Well, how could this bond have started? The earliest stages of the relationship were probably a little less dramatic. Imagine a group of wolves living near human camps. The most fearful wolves stay away. The most aggressive wolves create problems and are driven off. But some wolves are slightly calmer. They are curious enough to approach human leftovers and cautious enough not to attack. Over generations, those animals may gain an advantage. They find food near humans. Humans tolerate the animals that cause fewer problems. Perhaps people begin raising pups, feeding certain animals, or choosing the most manageable ones. This is one plausible explanation, often described as a self domestication pathway. Researchers also consider more active forms of human involvement. The exact process still remains unsolved. The important point here is that domestication was probably not one magical moment. No prehistoric human woke up one morning and announced the invention of the dog. It was a relationship that was built slowly through repeated contact. Once dogs entered the human society, humans carried them into new places. The 2026 genomic research suggests that similar dogs were already widespread across Western Eurasia by at least 14,000 years ago. The dogs found at distant sites in Turkey and the UK were more closely connected to each other than we might expect just looking at the geography alone. They are no longer merely some animals adapting to humans. They had become part of human movement and human culture. And this relationship, well, it went both ways. Humans changed dogs by controlling food, reproduction, and access to safety. Dogs may have also changed human routines, how camps were guarded, how prey was tracked, how danger was noticed, and perhaps even how humans thought about animals. Somewhere along that process, the wolf, sleeping outside the campfire, became the dog sleeping right beside it. Today, people buy their dogs beds, toys, food, and birthday treats. They take them to doctors. They rearrange travel plans around them. They speak to them in voices they would never use with another human adult. From a distance, that behavior might seem strangely modern. But perhaps it's not. More than 14,000 years ago, somebody spent days or weeks caring for a very sick puppy. They gave it resources, they gave it time, and after it died, the puppy was buried with humans. The world around dogs has changed completely, but the emotional instinct may be much older than we realized. Dogs may have begun their relationship with humans because they were useful, but usefulness alone does not explain why the relationship lasted so long. At some point, dogs stopped being visitors at the edge of the camp and they became part of the group. And perhaps that's why, thousands of years later, your dog does not merely live in your home. It watches your face, follows your gestures, and stares directly into your eyes. But why do dogs stare at humans in the first place? Well, that story may be even stranger. This is the first video that I've ever done, but in the next one, I want to tackle that question. So, if you enjoyed it, please subscribe. Thank you.